Is there anyone that's new to our book club tonight that hasn't joined before?
Me.
No?
Sandra.
Sandra?
Welcome, Sandra.
Hello.
Hi, Sandra. I'm Carolyn Ray from JourneyWoman, and Wendy Brooke is my co-host on this book club.
Thank
So
you.
welcome. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you. I want to hear about this book. Yeah, because I'm traveling to the Arctic next fall. So I'm really keen on following this book. Yeah.
Fabulous. So this is our 10th book club meeting this year, if you can believe it. Wow. We have 2 more left. So I just got the books the other day. So the next one is going to be about Cuba. It's called The Cuban Chronicles. Okay. And the one after that is called From Scratch, a memoir of love, Sicily, and finding home. And as with all of our books, these were recommended by by women in the JourneyWoman community. So those will be our last 2 books of the year. And at the end of tonight, I'm hoping that you all might have some ideas for books that we could look at for next year, because Wendy and I are just getting ready for that and trying to put a plan together for 2022. So we'll talk about that at the end. But usually the way this works is Wendy takes over. So, but maybe we'll just do some quick intros just to get us back into the spirit of things. And what I'd love to know is, has anybody been to the Arctic or is planning to go to the Arctic? And Jill, I am looking at you because I know you've just been to Greenland. So why don't we start with you?
Sure. So yeah, I'm Jill Valentine, and I'm a transformative travel coach. And very recently, I spent a week north of the Arctic Circle up in Greenland with a group called Wayfinders. And it was amazing. We took all sorts of, it was right near the Ilulissat ice fjord, which is a huge creator of glaciers and all the things and the icebergs that float down to Newfoundland from there. And basically we crossed that south down into Ilulissat, which is a town of about population 45 people maybe, and stayed in just the most incredible little lodges looking out on icebergs floating, and we got to do a glacier walk and all sorts of stuff. The guides were amazing. So yeah, and it was like the most remote place I've ever been to ever. We saw like a handful of locals, but it was pretty much just us and the wilderness, and it was spectacular. We spent one night camping out, which was incredible. Yeah, so I just highly recommend. I mean, it was absolutely amazing. I can't even, it was, and like the no trees, and it's all just kind of lichen on the ground, and we did a ton of hiking every day. We took a crazy boat that required us to be in some crazy big keep warm suit, like for 45 minutes out to the glacier. It was the most freezing cold I've ever been in my life. But it was, yeah, just spectacular. I can't and actually we spent a couple nights in Copenhagen on our way because Icelandair wasn't flying through Iceland, which is the other easy way to get there. And we got to meet with an incredible climatologist who's doing a ton of work up there, planting trees in the south to help with the climate change. And we got this really interesting presentation all about that. It was just incredible. So yeah,
we'll let you talk more about that.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you though, the reason we chose this book was we were trying to think of our once in a lifetime travel experiences for women, and one of them is seeing the Northern Lights. So I'm just curious, did you see the Northern Lights when you were there?
We did not.
Oh.
We had patrol out every night. Like we had people like, you wake up at this time. We ended up with cloudy skies a lot of the time.
Oh, interesting.
And yes, but a friend of mine who then spent the following week in Iceland saw like the most spectacular Northern Lights.
Of course.
So yes, so we missed that. I think there was some disappointment. I just feel like I'll see it somewhere sometime. But yeah.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Jan, have you been up north?
No, I think the farthest north I've been, I was in Iceland for a couple of days, but that's not the Arctic Circle. So, yeah.
And Sandra, where are you going, or what's your plan?
Me?
In the fall.
I'm with Adventures Canada. I'm traveling through the Northwest Passage going west next September from Greenland through Baffin Island, Ellesmere. I believe we go that far up to Coppermine River. Yeah, but I've been up there on with a company that we left from Coujouac in northern Quebec. That was about 12 years ago. And we traveled across the northern part of the waters north of Hudson Bay. We stopped in Cape Dorset, on Baffin Island, and several other communities. We saw huge walruses, a haul out for walruses, and a lot of birds. I was there for the birding more than anything. All the murres, common mures, and anyway, lots of wildlife. It was amazing. Yeah. And I've been north of the Arctic Circle in Norway, on the coast of Norway too, on the Hurtigruten coastal ferry up. I've been north of the Arctic Circle there. That was my second experience, I guess. Yeah. And I was in the Yukon last January, and I did see Northern Lights 2 nights in a row. So that was pretty impressive. Yeah. But I love it. I absolutely love the experience of the wilderness, seeing the wildlife especially. Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah. Peggy, what about you?
I haven't been to the Arctic, but the farthest north, like Jan, I've been to Iceland, and I've been in Alaska to Fairbanks, but that's about as far as I've gotten.
Oh, that's north. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. Mary, how about you?
About 15 years ago, I was in northern Alaska, and I was trying to remember some of the details. So I was looking through my travel journal, and there was this. I had written something that was similar in this story, The Magnetic North, where that I just, I had to go to the bathroom so badly. It was the middle of the night, and we had to use the bathroom. It was an outhouse, and I just couldn't get out of bed because I was so cold and I was afraid to go out. And so as a result, I had a terrible night's sleep because I was thinking about having to go to the bathroom the whole time. So I think that might be common when you're in an area that's really cold and you have to use an outhouse outside. So, but I had reindeer meat, and the beauty of it, it really is gorgeous. So I'm excited for Sandra. I would like to go again, thinking about what I know now, with the information. This book was so filled with facts and things that I would have been more aware of if I had done homework ahead of time.
Yeah, that's great.
Wow.
Eleanor? Have you been up north? Eleanor?
Where she is.
Okay, I'll come back to you. How about you, Joan?
I have not been to the Arctic, and to be honest with you, I don't really have a desire to go to cold climates, but
I'm with you, actually. Mary?
I haven't been to the Arctic. I have been to Iceland, and I've been to Fairbanks, Alaska. And I did see Northern Lights in Fairbanks. And I had a hard time reading this book, so I'm just interested in listening to the discussion.
That's great. Eleanor, I'll come back to you. Can't hear you if you're talking. Maybe she's taking a break. Well, we'll come back. But yeah, Wendy and I were talking right before this. This was a challenging book to read, but my goodness, so much interesting information in here that I think we're going to talk through some of the key points. And I think Wendy's got a book full of sticky notes. So Wendy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. And first of all, let me tell you that I have not been up north. I'm intrigued by it, but this week I'm in Southern California, and I'm so cold that I'm wearing an extra wrap. And it's like, 75 degrees here. So I don't do well in cold climates. So I probably will not venture up north. But today's story was, let me start by telling you a little bit about Sara Wheeler. She's 60 years old, so she's kind of in our range group, depending on whether you're high or low of that. And she's from Bristol, England, studied at Oxford. And she originally did some work in Greece and in Mediterranean in terms of writing. And she was then, later she was accepted. She was the first female writer in residence accepted by the US National Science Foundation in Antarctica, where she spent quite a bit of time. She wrote a book called Terra Incognita. And when she talked about that particular book, she said what fascinated her about the Antarctic was that it's so new. It's so new to humans, or to human population, in that it was only, no one had been to the South Pole until 1912. Mm-hmm. And so she felt by going there, it was still such new exploration. And then from there, she went on to write about the North. And I think she has an intrigue with the wilderness, with the environment, and it comes through in her writing. Now, for me, I found the book a little difficult. I really enjoyed it, but it seemed to go on and on and on and on. Sometimes it was like, first of all, I thought her description, she was very descriptive, and I thought she was able to tell facts in a way that I found very interesting. When I was reading about the explorers, I found that interesting. When she was writing about the details of what she saw, I think she did a very good job of expressing herself. And it was so full of pieces of information that I wasn't really aware of. Things like what is the Antarctic? What is, is it the tree line? Is it the frost line? Is it 60 degrees? What really, oh, there you are, Joan. But what really constitutes, these things that we all know, well, we know about the Arctic Circle, but what is it really, and how everyone sort of defines it slightly differently. Some things like a tenth in the US, a tenth of the oil, of the US oil, and a quarter of the world's gas comes from it. So it's really, there is a lot of richness up there. Unfortunately, that's being exploited, or at least that's our author's position, that there's been a lot of exploitation of the minerals and of the people. One of my quotes, there are several quotes that I had, because as I was going through it, I found different parts of it interesting. But I think my favorite quote was, she said, it's actually a quote that she makes of a quote, exploration is the physical expression of intellectual passion. And that was one of Captain Scott's sledgers who said that. And I think that really struck me, is this idea that exploration is the physical expression of doing something that we have this internal passion for. So before I go into some other things and talk a little bit about some of the points, rather than questions today, I have sort of some talking points we can sort of talk around. But does anybody else have some favorite, well, let's open up to the group, favorite sections or quotes that they want to share with the group?
I loved all the pictures. I thought the pictures were amazing.
Mm-hmm. And they really point out how different the differences. We really have it is a different group. It's a different group of people, of course, that also set in time. One of the things she does point out is that Lapland is really the only group the Laplanders are the only group that are of European descent, and whereas the rest are more of an Asiatic descent, which I thought was interesting that it's pointed out to that group. But the pictures I thought were fascinating. Other parts, yeah.
I enjoyed the inept explorers who always ended up having shoes with alarming regularity, and it was a book that had so much in it that there were so many things that I thought, oh, I should talk about that. But of course, I've forgotten it because there were far too many facts to fit in my head. But there were times, there was one time where she said, he was a brilliant man, but he forgot to wind the clock. So, they couldn't go and do their navigating. And I did enjoy that.
Yeah. And it does go to show that, the explorers, they were constantly out there and she talks about them being the leather eaters, right? Because they always end up at the leather position. But you're right. It's that the inept explorers, but maybe they're inept because they're the ones that we hear about that weren't successful. And once they became successful, they were no longer explorers, right? Which I thought was interesting how throughout the book, she also progressed in terms of how we did exploration. Later in the latter part of the book, when she talked about exploration, she was talking about exploration by air, or by balloon, which is interesting in itself because the balloons would not go up in the cold air, right? And so they came crashing down. But exploration itself was one of the themes that she has throughout the book. Yeah, Mary.
Like you, Wendy, there was just so much information. I started reading it and thought, I can't, this is just too much. So I just started skimming it. And when I saw a part that I thought was interesting, I'd start reading it. Yeah. And that way I kind of, I could tolerate, I was able to get through it. But I thought this could be a semester course. I mean, it had so much information. And I was thinking, wow, the research that she did for this. But I kept saying, wow, who knew? I kept, there were different facts and I thought, I didn't know this. But the one thing that ties into your comment about exploration and also thinking of around the world devastating, how exploration can devastate cultures. And this one quote this one line that she wrote, every nation devastates native cultures, even if it doesn't actually kill everyone off. The Russians did it with bureaucracy, Americans with money, Canadians, of course, with kindness. I thought that was funny when she wrote that. Swedes and Finns did it with chainsaws that chop down forests, and everyone has done it with booze and syphilis. And I thought, when you think around the world, whether it's Africa, South America, and it's a sad statement that with native cultures, frequently that's what we do. But anyway, that was a poignant statement for me.
It's an interesting thing you brought up about a semester-long course. Having been a university professor, that was one of the first things I thought of, is it would have been a great course where you could really, because it really delves into a lot of facts. And if you could take a little bit, just half a chapter each week, you can really delve into some interesting things. And I think, but it is a long book. I mean, you could pull out like all the exploration, or you could pull out a section on sort of the quirky anecdotes. You could pull out a section on exploitation. You could pull out a section on culture of dependency. So those are some of the main themes that I see, or that I saw throughout all of the chapters, touched on all of those different pieces. So for example, when she talks about it fosters a culture of dependency, a couple things she said. First of all, there's money for furs. And then once you had money for furs, and actually started out with something, with whalebone for buttons and something else, buttons and stays. And then it was money for furs. At that point, people started using the money to buy flour and alcohol. And then they started becoming dependent on having money coming in. So they switched from a truly living off the land to becoming more and more dependent on the dollar, or whatever your currency is, but on currency. And then pretty soon they stopped eating traditional foods because they were busy making money, so they could not go out and get the traditional foods. Then all of a sudden and then there was sort of this negative about traditional foods, save the whale, don't hurt the seals, that really push people away from the traditional way of life, as well as some of the other forced dependencies that were created through resident schools, etc. But then all of a sudden it became popular to go back to your traditional ways. But at that point, even though it was sort of a good thing to become traditional, the traditional foods that were there now were poisoned because of the pollution. And so, first of all, they didn't have the skills any longer. And on top of that, the levels of poison, the chemicals found because of the food chain and the chemicals. So it created this entire process of the people becoming dependent. And we see that she talks about that in each chapter, how government and society force that at each level. Yeah, Sally, did you have something on that? Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to look for it, but I was fascinated by the idea that the people that were furthest away from pollution were the people who were most affected by the pollution, and about how the Gulf Stream carries all these toxins up into the Arctic, and they get trapped in that Arctic Sea and eaten by the animals, and how, because it is a society that is so or was so dependent on hunting and so much eating of fatty meats, and how fats trap the toxins more. And it was fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And also tragic.
Yes, yes. But I think that it became full circle, that their way of life is no longer viable because of some of that, the toxicity that's coming in.
Yeah.
So that whole culture of dependency, we see it throughout. I was trying to see in some of the other chapters where she talks about it, everything from, well, let's talk another item that she brings in, not only the culture of dependency, but is exploitation. And she brought that out in various chapters in terms of how the people were exploited for different things throughout the time, whether they were used as sort of a symbol, talked even about being used as symbols to show how, I can't remember which chapter it was, but she was talking about how I think it was the US chapter, how in one side people are being held up as being, look at this, the wilderness and the natural beauty of Alaska, but at the same time, these are the same politicians that are cutting down. So on one side they hold it up as being great, and on the other they're still doing the exploitation on the other side of it. What about some of the quirky stories or things that happened? I know one that I think, Mary, you spoke about going to the bathroom. Well, or going to the outhouse at night. I don't remember where she was when she was talking about how she just got used to just going outside and not worrying about it. And they didn't even have an outhouse. They just went outside, and she became very, very comfortable with that. To me, the cold would bother me more than anything, but that was one thing that struck me as kind of interesting and quirky. Another anything about something that struck you as strange, or there are many pieces I didn't know. I was thrown for a loop when they talked about the issues with mosquitoes. Okay. I didn't think about mosquitoes as being a problem in the Arctic, because I always, living in a southern place, I always think of mosquitoes as being hot and muggy, not cold. So, what were some other things that people saw that caught them off guard and by surprise? Yes, Jill.
I didn't read the book, but something that I found when I went and I was told that was really interesting is, so we were on the west side of Greenland, And our guide told us that they that lived on the west side had a more shared and common language with those in Nunavut, and they understood the language better with people in Nunavut than they did with the people on the other side of Greenland, because the like getting across by boat was actually easier, and there was more connection to them than the other side, because it's just ice. Like, they don't actually communicate and actually, you know, spend time together. And I found that fascinating, that like they had a closer connection to people literally in a totally different country than on the other side of their country, purely because of the physical barrier of just ice between them. And I just thought that was such a really interesting and cool thing about up there. Anyways.
Well, and when she talked about it as being, I mean, I saw a connectivity as she went sort of around the globe of the top of how everyone really was very, very similar, right? I mean, the way of life was, we have constructed our own national boundaries, but the people that have been there were there before. And so they do have more in common with each other than they do with their nations. Right? Yeah, Sally.
And that was also very interesting when they took to the point of, was it the First or the Second World War, with people who were, I think it was the Second World War, where people in the area, I think it was when she was talking about Finland, and how the indigenous people there were having to be at war against people who were another nationality by modern boundaries, but perhaps they shared more with culturally. And then when the sides swapped, they had to then go and turn against the people they've been fighting with and fight against them. It makes you think the whole thing of national boundaries becomes quite nonsensical.
Right, very much so.
And yet how much we're prepared to sacrifice and how much blood we're prepared to shed for that.
Mm-hmm. You know, and you know, in terms of it, just in terms of governments using it, think of that, what the Cold War did to that entire region, you know, between Canada, the US, and Russia, putting up defensive borders that really brought to that region, it may have brought business at some point, but it brought our problems, our issues, or our national issues up to an area that really had nothing to do with it. They were, you know, the US and Canadian and Russian people at the top have so much more in common than they do with their governments down below. And yet they were being set up one against each other during the Cold War as well. And unfortunately, a lot of that stuff was put up, was used extensively, and then left. Yeah, Jill.
I was just going to say, when you talked about the dependency, so in Greenland, they're now run by Denmark, and they all want independence. Mm-hmm. But to try to get independence, they need to become not dependent anymore. But to do that, their hopes is like international companies coming in and setting up business so that they can, or more tourism. Like, it's interesting that even to achieve independence, they need to do it in a way that's totally dependent on the outside. Like, but they were fine until they, you know, till others came in, like you said, messed it all up, created this whole new system that doesn't work, and they can't kind of just go back to the living off the land anymore. And they are dependent and would need that to become independent. And it's actually really tragic, that just all the things. And there was a documentary I watched on the flight, and it talked about a town that was hoping a big aluminum company from the States would come in, and it was like a $3 billion project, and they were so excited and celebrating. And through the documentary, it showed all about alcohol dependence and the domestic violence, all of the stuff that just came. And then this project never came about, and it just showed that just the sadness and the drain, because everyone just leaves, right? They all go, they leave these small towns and either go to Nuuk or literally off of Greenland. And anyways, it was just such an interesting way to see they really do want independence, but to get it,
you know. And I think it was one of the Russians, the discussions they were talking about, about some oligarchs coming in and building up not only a factory, but a town, and they put in, it reminded me of the Colombian drug lords. You know, they come in and they put in all the infrastructure and put in their favorite coffee shops and that sort of thing while they're there, but then they leave. And because it's not like people are going to say, oh, let's go put a Nissan factory there. You know, it's just not realistic from an economic viable manufacturing site. So it does limit their resources to what they can do. And in keeping with that, I thought it was interesting when she was talking about Russia. And she said that, you know, when in the Arctic, parts of the Arctic are still closed to non-nationals. And she said there's 40 cities that are still very, very sensitive, and you have to go through a lot of red tape to be able to get permission to go there. And I think she said it took her 18 months to finally get permission, you know, the red tape and filling the forms to finally get approval to go up. And she said part of the goal where she was working at that time was to try to raise the unemployment, which was 70% in some of these villages. Now, 70% is horrific. But if you think about even in rural life, once you no longer are living off the land and there's nothing else coming in to bring economic boost, there is nothing to do. You know? And so these people were very much trapped because their traditional way of life was not possible anymore, but there was nothing else that came in to fully replace that traditional way of life. But she said that, and it was interesting because historically, in Russia, they tried to apply Marxist theories, a Marxist ideology to the society. And she said it's hard to do that because they were trying to do it to a society that had no industry, no agriculture. It had no formal leaders. And so how were they supposed to persecute a class, the upper class, you know, the proletariat, when there was none? They were already a classless society. And so yet they were being told, you need to persecute the bourgeoisie. They didn't have any. And so they were kind of being forced to create them because they'd never had it before. And they truly were already living a communistic life. They had no class, they had no leaders, they had no clans. And how were they supposed to find these rich people that they were supposed to punish because they had, you know? So it's our ideology trying to be forced onto a different group. Now, Alaska was one that she brought up as being, the title of the Alaska section was called 500 Alaskan Horrors, which I had, quite frankly, thought that when I read that title that she was going to talk more about the gold rush and some of that, but she didn't as much as I thought she might have. What I found interesting in the Alaskan, which again, a piece of history that I didn't know, Mary, that was during the claim that they made is they paid $962 million, 962 million acres, which was a tenth of the state of Alaska, was surrendered. This is part of that bargain. It was surrendered. They surrendered rights to the other 90% of the land. So they were given 962 million to allow them to give up rights to the rest of the land. And instead of reservations, because reservations were looked at the time as being negative, so they didn't put them and force them into reservations. Instead, they set up 12 regional corporations. Okay, and they invested half of the money they paid out and half to the regional corporation. So, but this was a problem because private ownership was not something that they had dealt with before. And I think we find this private ownership concept against indigenous people has always been an issue when you're trying to force private ownership on a group that has not had it before. And that's where she said that the politicians talk up the legend of the Alaskan wilderness, while at the same time they're promoting increased mineral extraction and other environmental degradations. So who here had read the whole book? Sally, I get the impression that you probably did. And Jill, you did? Other people skimmed it or at least, or didn't read it at all? Okay. Yeah, and I think, can we talk a little bit about any kind of the quirkiness that she saw? Any, for those of you who skimmed it, or some quirky stories of things that you found humorous in her travels? Yeah, Sally.
Yeah, I was fascinated by the breastfeeding.
Oh, I have that down too.
So,
Yes.
so the first time I came across it was when she was talking about how she had attempted, she'd learned that, you know, in the past, when the people were still nomadic, they used to strap the babies, the toddlers, to the sides of the sledges, or and that they used to be able to breastfeed the babies while walking. The babies would be attached to the sledge and the mother would be walking alongside and breastfeeding, and how she tried to do that, but she found that completely impossible. But then she was talking later about how she was struggling to breastfeed when it was something like -5 degrees. I never really thought about, I've never had kids, so I don't know what kind of effect temperature has on milk flow and things like that, but it sounded from what she was saying that it was difficult to get her milk flowing. And the guy said to her, well, his friend got kitchen aluminum foil and put that in her bra, and then that would, I'm busy making the gestures here, put it in the bra, and that would heat up her breasts, and then the milk would flow. And it was the only time in the book where she was kind of, I'm not going to put kitchen stuff in my bra. How dare you suggest that? Which was quite strange when she was doing all this other crazy stuff. Yep. You know, and she was having no problem with sort of just peeing on the flag and so on. But that was where she drew the line. She was not going to put kitchen utensils in her bra.
Yeah, right. And I often wondered, you know, I after I read that part, and I laughed because I thought, God. But at the same time, you know, I remember as when I was younger, back when we thought sun was good, we'd sit outside with aluminum foil to get extra sun on our faces, right? To heat us up. So it probably would heat it up a bit. But yeah, that was a good one. Mary, did you find anything that you found humorous as you were skimming through? Or were you looking more for, yeah.
Me or Mary Clark?
Mary Burke.
Mary Burke. I'm kind of embarrassed because the two things I wrote down, I didn't even realize they have to do with male parts, but the walrus's penis bone is 2 feet long. I thought that was a little bit, it was like, what? And then the other one was where someone wanted to castrate an animal. They would bite off the balls. I'm like, oh, really? So, I don't know why I came up with those things. Oh, also another one, which, you know, that whole universal thing around the world, we see so many similarities, but how many spirits that they have, and they're so lonely. They have so many spirits to keep them company. So I thought that's like a universal, I think, with when you're in an area that is less populated, there tends to be a lot of spirits around.
Sure. Yeah, the biting off of the balls struck me as well. But apparently now that's sort of, not only is it frowned upon, but now they must use these, you know, the metal extractors, which is how farmers like in the US and Canada use. So they can't use their old ways anymore. But I don't know that I would have wanted myself nor my spouse to be using the old ways as well. That was Lapland. It was castration by biting off the testicles, and it was also Lapland was the tinfoil in the shirt. So there you go. One of the things I found interesting, she was talking about towards the end. a couple of facts. One of them was that on average, the ice in the Arctic is 7 years old. I don't know why I thought it was older, but okay, on the average, it's 7 years old. And that the first year is grayish and multi-year is bluish. And the older it is, the less salt it carries. And so that was corresponded with this saying that you could wash with first year, you could cook with second year, and you could make tea with third year because the sailing would be less. And now, again, it may be also in terms of the chemical concentration as well, that you want to have those be later on too. And let me see, a couple of things. When she was in Sweden and in Greenland, I guess when she was in Greenland, she talked about, I thought it was humorous when she was talking about, I was shivering. And she said, I was in the oven, meaning in the area that they were using as the oven, in high-tech fabrics. And I was sustained by American provisions. And I wondered how the Norse Vikings had survived 450 years ago in Greenland. You know, here we are, you know, she was complaining, she had plenty of food and she had all the high-tech fabric, she had heat, and so it made her think about, how did we do it 450 years ago? And I think sometimes we think about, first of all, I always think about fur, because fur is so out of favor today, but fur is the warmest way to sustain yourself. Although when she was interviewing, I saw an interview that she gave, and she talked about the sleeping bags that were made out of fur, which were, she said, was very comfortable and very warm until they got wet, because then they just froze. And then you just had this wet, soggy mass that was so heavy that you couldn't really do anything with it. And it was impossible to get them dried out. But, you know, we think in terms of how did some of these people exist 450 years ago? So, I also was not as aware of this, I don't know how to pronounce it, Svalbard, which was the archipelago that she spoke about. And it was in the archipelago when she was learning to shoot bears. She was learning how to shoot, because in order to go out, she needed to be trained in shooting a bear. And they gave some facts that I didn't realize. Bears can run at 25 miles an hour. They can get up to 220 pounds. And then the 2-year-olds are the most dangerous, because that's their first year away from their mother. So they aren't really very good at hunting and foraging for themselves yet. And so they're the most dangerous to be. But yeah, so the bears themselves, I hadn't thought about bears attacking the people up there. So other thoughts? Peggy, did you have anything did you get through the book or parts of the book?
I got through about halfway through Canada, and then it was dense, very dense. I enjoyed it, but it was very slow going.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's the right word for it. It was dense. I did get through the whole thing, but I had to pick it up and say, okay, now you got to get the next chapter done. Yeah, and sometimes pieces of one chapter were so similar to another chapter that I was really trying to look at what those differences were between the groups. Yeah, Jan.
I was just going to say, well, I did finish the book, and I did enjoy it. I wasn't sure at the beginning if I was going to get through it, but I thought it was just different. I thought the cultures, you just think of the Arctic, you don't really think of the different sections, and I appreciated the maps. I wish she could have put the titles of the photos with the photo, and because you kind of had to keep going back and forth to go look up the title of the photo. But I think my favorite part also was the Laplanders. They just seem more, with the reindeer and everything, seemed a little bit more connected to their culture than some of the other. But,
and I wonder if it's because they were left more alone to maintain their culture, more so than Alaska, Canada, and Russia, you know, and that they were just kind of left alone, just go do your thing. I mean, not that they didn't have exploitation, some of these other things, but I felt that it was much less than some of the other cultures.
Yeah, it was interesting this morning in the Seattle Times, there was actually a front page article about the Arctic. A Coast Guard ship, a research ship had made a trip from Seattle and all the way around past Alaska up through Baffin Island and then down along the west coast of Greenland. And so it was kind of very timely. They, it said, you know, usually to get the crew a break, they'd stop on an ice floe. In the past, they would be able to stop on ice floe and guys would get out and they'd play hockey or do whatever. But this time they couldn't find one that was stable enough for people to get out on. So
interesting.
I was going to say, I interviewed an expedition leader a few weeks ago who specializes in Antarctica for our Once in a Lifetime series. And she also has spent a significant amount of time in the Arctic. And so we talked a lot about the differences between Antarctica and the Arctic. And one of the things that was really interesting to me, because I haven't been to either, she said in Antarctica, the wildlife is off the charts. Like you don't just see one orca or one animal, you see like 50 at a time, or you see, she said it's just an incredible, unfiltered, you know, plethora of wildlife. Whereas in the Arctic, you might only see a polar bear or kind of isolated animals. So it's interesting too, for me anyways, to think about the differences between the poles. And the fact that there are 5 North Poles or whatever she talked about, where, you know, there's magnetic, there's celestial, there's all kinds of different definitions of what a pole is.
And everyone claims it.
Yeah, and if you look at Antarctica, she said, is different because of its lack of people. Whereas the Arctic is full of people. And well, not full, but certainly that's what makes it culturally more interesting is the different groups of people up there. So anyways, I'll be writing about that shortly, but lots of interesting differences that I hadn't fully realized until I spoke to her.
Jill.
I was just going to share, I'm sure it's just such a fascinating thing that she must do as an expedition leader. Like I've traveled to places and you know, there can be a lot that changes with the rain and whatever, but it was such a challenge for our group leader because there were things that just like when the universe is, you know, something's happening like there's just nothing you can do. And we were meant to take 2 flights from Copenhagen and then an hour-long boat ride all in one day, but we arrived in Ilulissat and the wind was so bad that we couldn't safely go down in the boat. Like we couldn't take the boat ride through. And especially because a iceberg had initially been blocking the whole thing for quite a while. And then just about a week before we arrived, it shifted. And so there was a ton of like just ice and ice chunks. Like we were in boats and just banging through things and knocking into these like massive things floating. And so it was just like, oh, we're just going to have to wait. And then the final morning leaving, the wind blowing again. And we were all like, are we going to be able to take a boat back? Like, I can't imagine as an expedition leader just being so like icebergs could float and things like it was so fascinating. And then on top of that, the lodge normally, we were booked in and the weather's usually a little bit warmer. And I don't know, it just was very cold. I don't know if it was like a little because it was a little bit later. Our pipes froze. We didn't have electricity for a few days. Like the lodge was like, I don't think we'd have a group here again because like at this time, because it was so precarious. And And I just think, man, like for people to try to live on that kind of such a rugged terrain with such fluctuating conditions, it's anyways fascinating. And when we left, our tour guides were like, yeah, next week we're heading out to, hunt deer. I was like, oh, how many do you guys shoot? Like this sweet lady that was like our leader was so excited. She had killed the muskox that we were eating for dinner. Like it was amazing. And she was like, yeah, when you guys leave, I was like, how many are you going to kill? She's like, 5 or 6. And then we're going to trade with our friends up in the north for whale and this and that. And we're like, oh, how do you guys connect? Over Facebook Marketplace. Like there's a Facebook Marketplace for trading your like kill and stuff. I was like, this is fascinating. Like technology meets this world. Anyway, it's just such an incredible land with a lot of fluctuation and things. And I just think living must be such a, anyways, fascinating.
I really appreciate those comments, particularly about how the environment, how you're really captured by that environment. And the author points it out a few times when she's trying to, she talks about, well, maybe the plane will take off today, or maybe it'll be tomorrow, or the ship ride or the boat ride, maybe he'll come, maybe he won't, who knows, but that's just kind of living with the weather.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's fascinating. Well, we're Wendy, do you have more things? Because we're kind of coming,
just wrapping up, unless people have
coming to the end here. And I wanted to take a minute and ask you all if you have any suggestions for next year's book club, because Wendy and I are getting organized for that. Did anyone have any ideas or recommendations?
I don't know if this works, but it was written by a woman and it's called From Here to Eternity. She travels around the world and investigates different death rituals, like the way people deal with their dead around the world. And I found it fascinating and eye-opening. It's by Caitlin. Hold on. Wait. Caitlin. Oh, I returned it. Dowdy, I think. Let me check.
I can look it up.
Yeah.
But that sounds interesting with all the different cultural variations to it. Yeah.
Yes, it was. I liked it.
Interesting. Anyone else?
Do you want to do the same thing with memoirs, or do you want? Someone mentioned last time novels set in a certain location.
Yeah, I think Wendy and I are actually going to talk about it right after this, but I think we'd like to broaden it a little bit. And yeah, so.
I was just the other day, someone had sent me a link for Goodreads. Are you familiar with Goodreads?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was actually looking up different countries, and they have every country listed and, all sorts of stuff. So, I'm thinking if anybody wants to look at that for ideas.
Okay, well, if you have ideas, let me know. There's also a website called Trip Fiction that does trip fiction. And Tina Hartis, who runs that, wrote an article for us. I think it was about 2 months ago about books about Italy. And so she's going to do some more articles for us, actually. But you can also go to her website and search by country. What she's going to do for us is a little more curated. So that's a good one to look at too.
Girl called Rumi Ari Honavar.
Oh, I think I've lost everyone.
Oh. You get us back.
You're still there, right? Sally. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm dropping in and out.
Girl.
I thought coming to I'm in a little meeting room at the bottom of a garden at work because to get away from my colleagues, but I hadn't realized my internet connection was going to be so bad. I've dropped a link for one from a debut novelist that's I haven't read the book, but it sounds interesting. It's called A Girl Called Rumi.
Mm-hmm.
Novel. It's not a travel memoir. It's a novel that moves between contemporary USA, contemporary Iran, and Iran in the past. And it seems from the reviews, it just seems to have a kind of a bit of a magical realism feel, a bit of Persian poetry feel. It just seems interesting.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. That's great. I wanted to mention to you also that we, just before you leave, just to remind you that, just looking for my list here, we are rolling out a bunch of courses as well. We're just about finished one on iPhone photography, which has been really great. So we're going to do that again in November. And it's taught by Lee Horbaczewski. I don't think any of you are in it, but she's just an amazing class teaching you how to take photos on your iPhone and how to do the editing. And I was blown away by what I could do on my iPhone. It's pretty sophisticated. We're also doing one on travel vision. So this is something that we did earlier in the year, where we help you kind of put your travel vision together and do a creative board and think about your values. Jill is actually teaching one with us on transformational travel. Jill, do you want to talk about that for 1 minute?
Yeah, sure. So it's all about, like Carolyn said, transformational travel. So leveraging the power of travel for creating change both in your own life and in the communities that you travel to. So really looking at travel as a tool for personal change, personal growth, reflection, and being able to actually really leverage a trip as a personal journey, as an inner journey. So yeah, that'll be exciting.
Great. And then I am going to do one on travel writing in December. We're just firming up the dates. And then our last one is going to be solo travel wisdom, which is going to be led by 4 of the women on our advisory council, Joy, Brenda, Mary, and Marilee. And they're going to talk about solo safety and provide solo travel tips for people who might be just learning about solo travel. So all that's kind of coming out. So keep your eyes open, and we'll try and get you ready to return to travel next year, hopefully. Yeah. So
can I just say one little thing? Don't let the cold deter you from the Arctic. Like you dress warmly, you dress in the right layers, and I had a sleeping bag. I was like so warm in it, even though we were literally in a tent. Like it was a -25 sleeping bag. So just don't let that deter you, is all I have to say.
That's great. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next month, I hope, for Cuba. Go somewhere warm.
Bye, everyone.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.